Hello, everyone, the GNOME community and the world. Welcome to my talk, AI Navigating the Chaos, and three crazy cats. So I'll start with who am I. I am a long-term contributor to the GNOME project. I work on community management and advocacy. A lot I learned at GNOME. And I work for Intel Corporation as a senior community manager for One API for heterogeneous computing on GPUs. And I also work as an event planner and a program manager for developer outreach programs. So I can't do an AI without at least some reference to the matrix. And so, but I'm not here to really say you should use AI or whatever, but it's more of a talk to kind of get people up to speed. What is AI, what it's used for, how does it put together, that kind of thing. So it's really more about how do we position the project, right? And the idea, let's brainstorm how can we harness AI equitably and responsibly within the GNOME ecosystem. But before we do that, let's see what the world of AI looks today. And I'm going to say a disclaimer, I'm no AI expert. I'm learning just like you, and also my opinions are my own, not my employer's. So this is what AI looks like in a general flow. So you have a general view of AI, which is artificial intelligence, which is dependent on machine learning. And machine learning has been with us for many decades, many, many decades. And there's a sub-ecosystem called deep learning. And this is where a lot of things has been happening in the last 10, 11 years, right? And within the deep learning, and deep learning is really using, probabilities and I'm trying to get the name of the word I wanted to, but it's neurons, right? It's artificial neurons and then finally LLMs, large language models, are the even closer where you apply deep learning to that's the thing with generative AI and so forth, right? So when you're thinking about deep learning, there's two kinds. There's supervised and unsupervised. And if you look in this graph, you can see these deep learning algorithms have, the supervised training has things like labeled data sets. Like think of marketing data or sales data, that kind of things, right? It's classified, you know what it is, and you know what the output is. Then the unsupervised training is, this is about patterns, right? You don't really know what the data is. Think of like videos or things like PDF documents. You don't really know what the data is, but you kind of keep training it until it starts figuring out patterns, and then it figures out what it is, right? So when you're trying to teach through training, you first start with, okay, I recognize a line, or I recognize a triangle, and I recognize a dot, right? And then you keep training, and then it starts saying, oh, I can recognize a face, or I can recognize this animal, you know? And so just kind of, but you need lots and lots of data to make that happen. And then there's reinforcements training, where it's like, you say, oh, is this right? Yes, it is. Okay, I'm doing the right thing. Is this right? Yep, I'm doing the right thing. So it kind of trains through reinforcement. And then deep learning, the word I finally was looking for is neural networks. And that's the deep learning part where you're mimicking how a brain looks at patterns, right? We're using neurons, artificial neurons, which are essentially using mathematic models for that. So unsupervised, again, I'm sort of repeating myself, is basically creating predictive models using neural networks to parse and recognize patterns. And if you nail it down to one word, it's just predictive modeling. It's just guessing with high probabilities. And then comes the large language models. And this is the big thing behind ChatGPT, Copilot, all these things that you see that everybody's making a big deal of. It's large language models. And this is exactly where they're using the neural networks and try to figure out how to generate something based on a prompt. So you do all these prompts, and then it runs it through the large language model, and then does something. So you can kind of see this, right? So in this graph, you see web data, source code, images, structural data. I have something called RAG, which is, they call this, sometimes when AI does something, they call it an AI hallucination. And it's when you say something and it's completely wrong. Like, are you hallucinating? What is this, right? And RAG says, okay, this thing is out, and I'm going to kind of go out into the web and find the data, that's correct data, and then use that to train and fix myself, right? So that's what, and that RAG is relatively new in the last 6 months or so. And there's already a nonprofit around called OPEA. That's a whole bunch of companies are working on RAG. And unfortunately, I didn't tell you what RAG means, because now I've forgotten it. So I will tell you later in the chat. And so if you go through these large language models, you see it can do grammar checking, it can do the generate AI people know, it can do medical analysis, because again, if you're looking at a medical chart, let's say you're looking for anomalies, so finding anomalies better than humans can, because again, it's pattern matching. And so if you think like, well, doesn't match the right pattern that I see in a normal, what is normal, right? And so point that out, right? Same thing, self-driving cars, or translating from one language to another, so forth, right? So these are things there. And I have this little picture of knobs, and you can train these LLMs with lots and lots of knobs, with thousands of knobs, and each one of them is adjusting the behavior of the LLM. So there's a lot of parameters that you could change. They call it hyperparameters and so forth, right? So the industry is gone, we really want to do this, right? Because they see all kinds of possibilities. So they're buying data they could get their hands on, and trying to find new ways to use LLMs. There's all these research going on, and they're trying to find new ways to solve old problems, which, we kind of seem to be doing that every generation. We have new technologies, and we're still trying to try to solve the same old problems. But ultimately, again, as I was going back, what is the essence of AI? And it's just a mechanism to discover patterns. And every time, if you're taking a generate AI, say, write a sentence about this, right? Every time it's going through it, it actually breaks down into little components, and it just says, what is the probability that the next component is this? Well, based on all this data I've been trained on, there's a high probability it's this. And it keeps doing that until it comes out with a sentence, right? But it's taking all this human human works to do that. I like to call it Mad Libs for some people who don't know what Mad Libs are. When I was a kid, to keep me quiet on a road trip, they would give me Mad Libs. And then you have a story. And then they'll have a fill in the blank adjectives, noun, verb, and then we kids will be putting in some absurd verb or absurd noun, and then it comes out with this funny story, right? And that's what Mad Libs is, and for those who don't know. But we talk about training, but that's only one part of AI. Like you're feeding this, but then how do you tell it's correct? Right? And that's where inferencing comes in. Inferencing tests the correctness of an LLM and keeps using real data. And it says, like, hey, did you really get the right response? Did you get the right response? I don't know. And so you use this, it's QA, right? You always QA something. And so that's what inferencing is. And interesting enough, inferencing more than LLMs has both a high carbon impact and compute impact. And what is that? It takes millions, hundreds of millions. OpenAI spent, I think on GPT-4, spent $100 million to train one LLM models. How many LLM models are there? Just imagine. And it takes $1 million to train them, and that comes through the compute. There's like thousands of GPUs in a cluster to do it, right? And we're talking GPUs of various types. And then the carbon emissions are insane. So think about one LLM is 125 round trips between New York and Beijing. And that's just one. So there's 54 of these LLMs and growing. So you can imagine that the cost of AI is fairly high for people. By and large, so the tool chain to train an AI is largely open source. And I left to TensorFlow and PyTorch are two such ones that are super popular and being used all the time. And for open source LLMs, we have, of course, Meta has Llama, and Bloom is another one for Hugging Face, and then BERT by Google. And Microsoft has one. So everybody probably has some kind. OpenAI had their older ones have had a open source license, but the new one is more proprietary. So it's generally been that. But then if you look at it, you still need, even if the tool chain is open source, it still takes hundreds of millions of dollars to do things. But the interesting bit is you can do that training by micro-training. Thank you. 10 minutes left. Okay, so I'm going to go faster now. So open source inferencing is OpenVINO, OpenPL, C-Translate are a bunch of stuff that does open inferencing. Intel manages the OpenVINO project. It's one of those things. What's the debate going on in open source and AI? The OSI's position is this is really unprecedented. And the questions they're kind of asking is about data and certification, right? So how do you determine if a system is certified open source AI, and then what constitutes data in an AI environment, right? Like how do you identify what goes into an AI or LLM? And so the debate is they have a draft, and they've been doing a roadshow, going to various places, and they're focusing on the code. And the four freedoms, but not necessarily the data. Now, there are others who said, well, how can you only focus on the code when an LLM or an AI is nothing without the data? So this whole thing is there's this huge debate going on, like how do you classify that data? What's in it? Think of it in ingredients, right? Because you don't know there's probably definitely AI who's using sketchy data, right? And that data is going to be bad because if you're trying to understand what's the training data is, the global South communities cannot build, like in terms of its accessibility, they can't do their programs on their own. They can't afford to pay OpenAI. But for them to participate in this, and we need that because again, sketch data, right? I'll give you an example. If I type in an Indian man walking down the street, almost 99% of the time, it's going to be a guy with a beard, a turban, and some kind of religious thing on every time. I can never get it to do anything else. This is what AI thinks Indian people are, right? It's this very narrow thing. And so this is why it's important that global South communities participate, because they don't have any idea of our languages. They don't have any idea about anything. And so, we need to be able to self-correct. And use images, right? So these are like crazy stuff that we need to figure out, and that's where this debate comes in. Ethical concerns, harvesting the data against the will of the creators. training on dubious data, that might that might perpetuality, identity theft, propaganda. The amount of turbulence that we're going to get through AI, we need policies and we need them now. And there's still a whole bunch of hype on AI. And Goldman Sachs says it's like $200 billion is invested in AI. But I've been told that the bottom has finally, and there's going to be a course correction. Hardware. By December, we're going to see AI PCs. And they're going to have NPUs, neural processing networks, so they're the ones that are going to handle that math of neurons, and so they can offload it. Intel has Lunar Lake in laptops to speed that. AMD has Ryzen with XDNA drivers and so forth. Okay, so we're trying to get back to GNOME. GNOME and the Foundation, I think it's important that we take a political position on AI. It's a position statement so that we're working with the FSF, Software Freedom Conservancy on where we stand simply as from an ethics point of view. And we have to be with our partners because I think it's important to know where we stand because AI represents so many things. So that's one of the things I think is important, especially if we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and things like that. We want to say we care about the data that comes in. This is an important part of it, and that's why we want to make that political statement. Leveraging AI today would make sense, right? One idea is maybe to use AI to help ease code maintainership. One of the problems with headaches we're going to get is the upcoming generations are going to be used to using generative AI to at least start with code, let's sample code. So what happens if the AI is generating the wrong code? And now they come in and then they like, hey, why is this thing not working? Well, you're doing it all wrong. This is absolutely wrong. So it's almost like we need to get ahead of it in a way to make sure that they're being trained on each release. And so that's something that might be problematic as in the future for younger developers coming there. The other one is, you can train on issues. How can we ease maintainership? There's lots of ways to do this. Training on our documentation. A lot of times I've used this, I've used for Python to generate. I wrote a thing that hooks up to pulse audio or Pipewire, and then recording it into a WAV file, and then running it to a Whisper LLM, and then I get a thing out of what was said in voice, right, on text. But I use generative AI because I had no idea how it started. But it was a great way to know how to use Pipewire. Anyway, the call for actions is try out these large language models. You can run them on your laptop today. There is an app on FlatHub called Alpaca, and the great thing is you're not going onto the web. It is all the generative data is running on your laptop only. So it downloads the LLM model, and then it's already trained, right? So it's just generating stuff. So you can do prompt engineering on that. So then if you want to look for new models, the AI community has a GitHub-like place called Hugging Face. That's all I have today. It's my glad to hear your thought. Is there any questions? Anybody on the chat can? What?
We have asked if they have any questions.
Okay, great. Did I get it under time?
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
Nailed it. You got two whole minutes here. Thank you. Really good question.
It's still 12:25, right? Sorry, 14:25.
2:20 is the after break.
Up to 20. Okay. Yeah, we can wait for a few minutes if we have any questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
I ran all the way back here from where we had lunch. I left my phone there. And Arthi had called them up. They got the phone and kept it for me. So it was like I got here just like right before this talk,
Yeah.
after running, And luckily, I was just thinking, oh, is it gonna rain? Can I get there and back before that? Yeah, it just started.
Yeah.
Now it's done.
Yeah.
Until the next storm. There's nothing mild out of Denver. It's always over the top. If it's gonna hail, it's gonna hail like crazy. If it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain like crazy. If it's gonna snow, that will happen in June. You'll be shoveling snow, and then within a few hours later, it'll be 100 degrees. 100 degrees.
I don't think we have any questions as of now. So
Okay, great.
maybe-
Well, they know where to find me.
Yeah.
Y'all know where to find
Yes.
me. So
Yeah.
hit me up later if you're all shy about asking questions. Thank you all.
talk about open source enthusiasts and educators supporting Malaysia government's open source initiative. So a little about me. I'm currently Ubuntu members since 2008. I'm one of the Ubuntu membership boards as well, one of the board. Now I'm still involved with various projects in Ubuntu, primarily focused on community, educations, governments, and enterprise. And I'm one of the members of a GNOME Foundation. And a part of it, I'm the organizing community members for UbuCon Asia and GNOME Asia Summit as well. And currently, I'm coordinating and leading the GNOME Malaysia's, Ubuntu Malaysia's, and Malaysia OpenStack user group. And with that, I'm recently onboarding one of the defense industry vendor, which is Nizra Systems. So a little bit of a disclaimer. What I'm going to present is within my past experience working with the Malaysia government. I am not representing any official government officers, and I'm coming from one of the open source software communities in Malaysia. Any articles, graphics are publicly available. Informations and photos are from the open source software communities, teachers, and the education's or open source software group in Ministry of Educations. So a little bit about open source software in Malaysia government. So the government already have decisions on implementation of the open source software under the one unit called Malaysia Administrative Modernizations and Management Unit. In short form is MAMPU, was directed to study and the feasibility of implementing open source software. So the proposals on open source software implementations to the public sector of Malaysia. The proposal recommendations were tabled out by MAMPU and endorsed by the Malaysia government on 19 June 2002. Open source software implementation in public sector will be carried out concurrently with building necessary infrastructure such as technical support, human resource skill and development. However, changes will be introduced in stages and to ensure that there is disruption. And the objective of the open source software implementations to reduce total cost of ownerships, increase freedom of choice of software usage, increase interoperability among systems, increase growth of ICTs, increase growth of open source software industry, increase growth users and developers community, reduce the digital divide. And there is also a guiding principle for open source software implementations. It must have to fit the purpose, least disruptive to operations, coexistent with other legacies proprietary system, and leveraging on existing facilities, hardware and software. And it's not driven or controlled by hardware and software vendors. So the Malaysian government has its own master plan, which is the laying foundations. The implementation phase have early adoptions, accelerated adoptions, and self-reliance, whereby the laying foundations, it must enabling the environment under the policy and legislations, leaderships and coordinations, incentive and funding, people and cultures, and there is infrastructure and research and development. On top of it, it also have a knowledge bank in order for us to store all the necessary documentation and information regarding the implementations. So on top of it, of course, the solutions area whereby to have a workload consolidations, clusters, desktop, infrastructure, application solutions, and towards of it is the objective and visions. So there's a few of the strategic trust area. One of it is like develop open source technical implementation plan for public sectors, and trust a governing body to champion, monitor and drive the open source software implementations, train and develop human resources to support open source software implementations, promote creativities and innovativeness via research and development, continuous development of the policies and legal directions, provide incentive to prosper the development of open source solutions, and last and but not least is the encourage smart partnership with relevant organizations. So on top of it, like after the years by years, so basically the government's having a one program called Open Source Development and Capabilities Program, in short form is OSDEC. So the creation phase in the year of 2016 to 2018. So under the phase of creations, there has a infrastructure development, coaching, creations of public sectors, open source software, community and reinforcement of open source software collaborations in Malaysia, which is that comes where the open source community and enthusiasts are, and the government will having a open source repository. Then they have like open source conference at the national and ASEAN level, and they started doing public sectors generic system development, means transforming from the legacies to the new open source platform. And then after the years of 2018, starting like 2019 to 2020, there is a reinforcement phase whereby the public sectors, the governments came out the open source software, the frameworks, and they have a coaches to coach the agencies under all the related government agencies. And then there is a expansion of open source community to an international level. So whereby at this stage, the government also helping the open source communities to help the international events and some sponsorings to the international events as well. And a part of it, they still have remaining consistently remaining the open source conference at international level, and continuous developing the generic application on top of it. So from all the introductions about the government's program about the open source software, so they comes where we are now. I mean, like where the enthusiasts and all the open source community support the government. So the pictures tell thousands of stories. So basically, there is like among all the teachers, all the lecturers, all the professors also involving with this initiative. So we have workshops for basically to try run the implementations of the open OSS in at the Ministry of Education's level. So we have a series of meetings and discussions, and we also have a list of workshops. It means like tabling out what are the components or what are the necessary open source software that can be in line with the Ministry of Education. So one of it actually the open source community being called to support one of the initiative of the Ministry of Education, basically whereby we will call for discussions with the state department of the Ministry of Education to have the implementations of the open source software as an alternative to the Microsoft software. So yeah, there is like we discussed that we've been shared the statistic, how many school and how means like based on the type of school, and then a part of it and another discussions we will have with the government officers and the open source community members. So yeah, there is like also the Linux Varsity program. So it's basically under the Open Source Developer Club Malaysia or SDC. So we have the Linux Varsity whereby we have initiate to go helping the one of the universities to do a tours, and then we do the some talks or forums to discuss about and to share about the open source software. And then yeah, we also have seminars and some open source software talks to share what is the benefits of the open source, that the open codes means, and then yeah, then we keep having discussions so on and so forth, and then we have also we've been invited also under the one roof of the booth. If you can see, there's so a few communities and the open source software enthusiasts are gathering together under the one roof. So there is Ubuntu, OpenSUSE, OWASP, GNOME, and etc. So from there, basically, we will do sharings with all the audience participant with the events and who came to our booth. And on top of it, also we have an initial meetup to discuss and to plan what the next action plan, how the community can support the governments. Yeah. And we also have the meetup. One of it means like the Ubuntu having a meetup, yeah, to discuss how we will emphasize to support the government itself. Yeah, from the personal capacities, basically, I'm also like spreading the news, means like what we have done. For example, like we have a meetings with the governments, and then we have a try out workshops, then we spread into our media socials. And part of it also, like I'm also doing some sharing the words, like our minister basically the Malaysia open source community, hey, come and support the government aspirations, means like they are planning to moving forwards, means like go for open source software. Okay, so a part of it's like actually GNOME Malaysia and the GNOME Financial also help to support, means like indirectly the Malaysia's market, and then of course the globally. So we are very thankful to GNOME Foundations that we being have opportunity to host the GNOME Asia Summits for 3 consecutive years, continuous years. So we have 2020. Unfortunately, that time, so yeah, it's a new norm whereby we have faced the pandemic, and then we were still hosting online as well. 2021 GNOME Asia, and we are very lucky after all the pandemic is over. We managed to hold the physical event, the GNOME Asia in Summit 2020 in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So we are really grateful. Like the GNOME Foundation also being a part for our journey to support the government initiative for open source software as well. So with all the relentless and all the efforts being done by the community, so there's our buddy, the friends, tired, for example. So hoping that we are surely we will not go. I mean, like we're not like failing our effort. So yeah, Alhamdulillah means like we manage. Yeah, we do like the spirits of the community and this everything. So there is a good outcome out of it. So yeah, this is basically the outcome of all our efforts. So basically, I think half of the uh, school lab being installed with the endless and some other Linux like Linux Mint, Ubuntu. So actually, there's like the fruitful results that the community get. I mean, like actually by doing and supporting our government. So yeah, we have the secondary school having it, the primary school having it. So, but this is basically among the maintenance PC, if I'm not mistaken. So, the remaining the new machines still are on the Windows, but I think there is like some of the lab, the, the IT labs at the school. Yeah, we managed to transform it from Windows to Linux desktop. So yeah, the teachers, the technician of the school also helping to install the old machines. Means like we have the like very old machines that we managed to revive. So previously it was like the using a Windows 7. So I think the Windows 7 is also already end of life. So we managed to revive some of the devices with the all the Linux uh, operating system. Then the open governments continues, whereby there is like progress in the adoptions of the government office. Uh, yeah, I mean adopting the system applications or the office suite applications. So from year to year, so yeah, the governments keep adopting open source software. I mean using and not much that they say they left the proprietary, but from time to time they are still like migrating some of the applications to the open source applications. So yeah, then from as earlier I said, the open source development and capabilities programs continues in the government. Uh, so from this program, basically the open source community and the government is especially being collaborate together, whereby some of us actually being one of the traders for 80 types or either the programming languages, the development, and then the DevOps and everything. So that's how basically we the open source community basically supporting the government, our governments. Okay. So from yeah, from years to years, it means like early 2000s until now. So the government also have the public sector's open data platform. So whereby this platform have a shared some of the information publicly, means like the statistics or whatever been the data necessary that the public can access. Yeah, I mean like previously maybe there is like some close informations that will not shared with public. So with all that, the governments have increasing adopting open source and everything. Then our minister, the digital minister, openness as actually will be the digital mindset will make the national digitalization plan a success. So yeah, I mean I think from the directions of the minister, so yeah, we I think we all the government directions we go for openness. So with all that, the open source software communities still continuing supporting the governments until today. So basically, we got. I mean, like we've been invited. For example, the Ubuntu community being invited to co-exist in the event of the cyber DSA. That means that which is like the cyber warfare and everything's all the Ministry of Defense event. So they have a new, they make us a new programs, means like basically the UbuCon is like Ubuntu conference being a part of the 3 days event. So yeah, we are lucky to have it. Actually, they are also inviting others open source software as well. That will be part under the cyber communities launch. So they will be either the securities communities and then the others open source software. So in that launch, yeah, like I said before, so all we are being like the troopers to still keep supporting in whichever we can, either helping in the trainings and sharing our knowledge to the government officers. Okay, so of course, last and not least, we will not let this happen to our governments. So, yeah, said to be true means like hopefully that the events that facing the world face in the past few days will we will try to minimize or make it's not like a showstoppers for our governments to move forward. So yeah, I think that's all for me. So any questions from the floor or from the room?
Hi, can you hear me? It's not. It wasn't working.
Can you hear us in the room here?
No, you
No?
don't have it.
Oh, interesting. Can you hear us in the room? Maybe?
No, I don't think so.
It's a big blue button. That's it's selected. I'm not sure.
You
Yeah,
just put
sorry,
it in
you can
chat
chat,
right
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry?
cycle to move some of GObject inspection into glib and to stabilise its APIs. Emanuele Bassi did a talk yesterday about these changes from the point of view of introspection, annotations and library APIs, but I'll be talking today about it from the point of view of glib, apps, language bindings and distros. The work for this merge was funded by the Sovereign Tech Fund, the STF, and it was to help with keeping our fundamental infrastructure up to date. I'll go through the problems, what the problems were with the old arrangement, what we changed, and how it impacts on apps and bindings and distros. So the incubate, and the idea was, when GObject inspection was started as a project, it was deliberately started outside of the glib Git tree in order to allow it to incubate, and the idea was to eventually merge it in. So 10 plus years later, we've now done that. The previous status quo of having it be out of tree worked okay, but it made for slow iteration because the introspection data for glib was generated in the GObject introspection build, so it was in a separate module, and that had to be periodically and manually updated from glib. This made for a lot of busy work, but it also meant that glib couldn't use any of its introspection data internally, for example, for building documentation. So, what is GObject inspection? It's formed of various libraries, formats, and utilities. So there's a brief list of the main ones there on the slide. They come together to allow you to take a C library that you've written, to scan its source code to extract the API definitions using GIR scanner, and that will then produce a GIR, which is an XML file. You can then use GIR compiler, which is another utility, to compile that GIR file into an architecture-dependent binary typelib format file. Language bindings then load these typelib files when you import a module in another program or library written in a bound language. Finally, libgi repository is kind of a helper library, but it's public, and it provides programmatic access to read and to write the typelib format. So most bindings will use libgi repository to read the typelib files, and GR compiler, the utility, uses it to generate them. So merging the two, we've got our components here, which are in our two different modules. And you'd think that we just move all of the ones that are in, all of the components out of GObject inspection and move them into glib, and then we're done, right? No. GIR scanner, which is the utility that scans your source code and generates the XML file, the GIR file. It's because it needs to parse C source code. It's written in a mixture of all sorts of things: CPython, Python, Flex, Bison, and as a result it needs quite a lot of dependencies in order to be able to be compiled. In particular, it needs the Python development headers. So moving that into glib would add those dependencies to glib, and that would be quite a big and unacceptable change. So approach 2. This is the approach we actually took. It's basically to merge half of GObject inspection into glib. So we move libgi repository and the GIR compiler into glib, but the GIR scanner stays in the GObject introspection project. This means we've essentially split the kind of introspection pipeline into the parts which generate these GIR files, which stay in GObject introspection, and the parts which consume the GIR files, which have moved into glib. And they will consume those GIR files and then generate and read the typelib files. In terms of API changes, I think the most important thing to note is there have been no changes to the typelib or the GIR formats. So all of the tools and libraries from before this move should be interoperable with all of the ones after this move, because they all use exactly the same formats. We have, however, made a number of API changes to libgi repository and the utilities when we moved them into glib. to tidy things up and to improve the APIs and make them more usable and conformant to modern standards. In particular, the GI repository, it's a homegrown type system, and that's been replaced with the more standard G-type instance. The new version of libgi repository and all of the utilities are completely parallel installable with the old version, so consumers of the old versions can continue to use those old versions even whilst other consumers, like other bindings, can use the new versions. And the old versions with their old names and versions continue to be shipped with GObject introspection for the moment. And there is a full list of API changes and renames and all of the migration information you might need in a migration page in the glib documentation. So what does this mean for me as an app developer? If you're an app developer, you don't need to do anything at all. It's great. None of the pipeline for building the GIR files has changed, so you could move from GIR compiler to GI compile repository, which is the old version of the utility, to the new version, and that's the utility that turns your GIR files into type libs, but there's actually no pressing need to. There's no functionality change there, it's just a rename and the source code moving. So just use whatever your build system makes it easy to use. For Meson at the moment, this is GIR compiler, which is the old version, via the generate GIR function in the Meson GNOME module. If you are a binding developer, you don't need to do anything immediately. You may want to put an item on your roadmap for porting to the new version of libgi repository, but it's not critical. Because of the API changes in it, this will require numerous small code changes. Many of those can be made mechanically, but because of the number of them, supporting both versions of libgi repository via a compile time option in your binding is probably not feasible. There'd just be too many if-defs. But because the typelib format hasn't changed, you don't need to coordinate porting with other bindings or with distros. So just do it according to your own timeline. Porting should, however, mean that you end up with cleaner code overall due to the various API improvements we've made. So you might want to do it for that reason. If you do port and you find parts of the API which are still awkward to use or which could do with improvement, please let us know by filing an issue against glib and we'll see what we can do about it. For distros, there'll be a one-time change, which the details of which are sort of fully listed in the glib 2.79 and 2.8t release notes. But the key changes are the new version of the libgi repository library. It should be fairly straightforward as an addition because it's parallel installable with the old one. The other main change is the change to glib build, which is a little bit more involved. So basically, instead of being built once, your glib package now needs to be built twice. It needs to be built once without introspection support, and then you need to build GObject introspection to get GIR scanner available, and then you need to rebuild glib with introspection support so that it can use the scanner you've just built to extract its own API definitions and then generate its documentation. So that makes it a bit more complicated. Distros should have a way of dealing with bootstrapping problems like this already, but unfortunately that's one of the downsides of this move. But again, because the new and old versions are parallel installable, you shouldn't need a flag day transition in your distribution until you want to stop packaging the old versions. So again, you can schedule that at your leisure. What does this mean for you if you're a glib maintainer, like me? It's made the CI and build system somewhat more complicated for glib because we now have to be careful about providing overrides for tools like GI compile repository. So to make sure that we're using the utilities that we've just built within the build in order to build our own type libs. It also means we potentially have to build GObject inspection in CI, but both of those problems are solvable. On the flip side, and the big advantage here, is it means we've been able to port to GI.gen, so a new documentation tool, which has made the documentation for glib much more modern, and it can now happily go up on docs.gtk.org and sit alongside modern documentation for other libraries without looking out of place. So that's a big advantage, and the reason we needed to do this change in order to allow that is because GI.gen builds its documents based on the API descriptions in introspection files rather than by parsing source code. So what's next? For now, this is the end of the big rearrangements, and any kind of work we do from now on will be more about stabilization and tidying things up. For example, by adding more unit tests, because historically libgi repository has not really had many, even though it's kind of a key component in our language binding story. Porting the glib documentation to gi.gen has been done at a high level, but there's still a lot of individual documentation comments which might need syntax and formatting tweaks and rewriting to best make use of the features that gi.gen provides us now. So help is very welcome on that, and it's work which is very suitable for drive-by contributions. For example, if you just want to improve the piece of documentation you are reading at the moment, so please do get in touch. The scanner side of GObject inspection is now going to get louder and more opinionated in an effort to improve the introspectability of things in the projects you run it on, but you'll have to watch Emanuele's talk from yesterday to hear more about that. So that's an overview of what's changed and why. There's a bit more information in the issues linked here and the migration guide, and if you've got any questions, now's the time to ask them. Thanks very much. Hello.